Hey there, welcome to the trailer for the MetFlex and Chill podcast. This is your host, Rachel Gregory, and I'm excited to share with you a sneak peek into the first 7 episodes that will be launching next week for the MetFlex and Chill binge week. So in today's episode, you're going to hear from our guests, Dr. Brett Scher, Ashley Van Houten, Danny and Maura Vega, Christina Kerp, Dr. Ken Berry, Dr. Jamie Seaman, and Dr. Ryan Lowry. I hope you enjoy this sneak peek, and I'll see you next week for Binge Week. Get excited. What I see is that, being in ketosis and following a ketogenic diet, 24/7 may not be necessary for your average person who's just looking to get healthy, live a healthy lifestyle. It might be necessary for someone who's trying to treat some type of disease or cognitive issue or something like that. But in my opinion, it's really understanding this concept of metabolic flexibility and teaching your body that it should be able to go back and forth between these two main fuel sources, which are fat and carbs. So using carbs when you need them during, high intensity exercise or for, maybe some hormonal balances and things like that. And then obviously using fat and ketones when you are just at rest, you're working throughout the day, you're not, exerting yourself. What's kind of your opinion on this concept of, dual fuel and metabolic flexibility and being able to be as efficient as possible? Tell me a little bit about what you think about that.
It's a great point and a great question, and one that I think we're going to continue to learn so much about. And I agree completely with what you said. If you are trying to reverse morbid obesity or reverse your diabetes or your metabolic syndrome, then being in ketosis has a strong role. And I think that's where you should be in ketosis. If you want to be as healthy as you can be, you're not fighting any of those medical problems, but you don't want to in the future. And you want to lower your risk of cancer and Alzheimer's and heart disease and just promote overall health. Then do you need to be in ketosis all the time? I agree with you. Probably not.
Ultimately, years and years of experimenting and learning and figuring things out and trial and error has taught me what works for me, which is different than what's going to work for other people. But it's what I came to was exactly what you came to, which is what's the most important thing is being healthy enough that you're resilient and you have flexibility to take whatever comes to you. So I was really proud over the last year when I was experimenting with some fasting that I handled it really well, I think, because I'd gone through this sort of process with the lower carb, and I've gone through this process with keto and carnivore and trying some different things. And I was able to, on a dime, not eat for a day and feel totally fine because my body was resilient and could deal with sort of a change in my routine, right? And similarly, if I go on a vacation and I go to Europe and I decide I'm going to eat a bunch of bread and wine, I don't completely fall apart either because my body's like, okay, we got it. We get it. We see what you're doing. Like, we can handle this for a little while. And that's what the flexibility is. It's the ability to not have to live to such a rigid kind of structure. And again, I recognize that I'm fortunate in that way because there are some people who don't have that ability. Like some people, because of autoimmune issues or other chronic issues, like they're going to find that they have a lot of relief being super strict. And that's great. And it's great that those options are available to people. 99% of us that are healthy and relatively sorted out in North America, like we don't need to be that strict and adhering to these like super uber restrictive diets. I just don't think it's necessary.
Most of America has never been in a state of ketosis, or they never tapped into their body producing ketones or being able to tap into their fat stores. So they're never able to be where we are, where it's, having this metabolic flexibility advantage. So I do think there is a point in time that you do have to go keto for a little bit, or at least do some fasting and stuff like that to train your body to know what ketones are. Because if you've never been in a state of ketosis, your body just doesn't understand what that is. But then there's the other side of the spectrum where it's like you can be in ketosis for years and years and years, and your body starts to become a little bit less efficient at using carbs. And also your mind, like your mindset is like, shoot, like carb phobia. And it's like this, it's kind of just like this whirlwind of things that a lot of people are struggling with. And I think that's one of the biggest things now that keto has been so popular for, the past year or two. And now people are starting to realize like, wow, like I benefited from it but like, what do I do now? Because I want to go to that wedding and eat that piece of cake and not feel like I just ruined my entire life.
I was probably getting more metabolically inflexible. I was getting those issues of, that glucose intolerance that Dr. Bickman talks about. And then,
can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So one of the things that people say is physiological insulin resistance, which ever since we had Dr. Bickman on, he was like, I just don't like that term because we're not insulin resistant. We're just, our pancreases are not really pumping out lots of insulin, and we're just, you use it or lose it type of thing. Like the same thing is if you don't use your muscles, your motor units are going to stop firing and you're going to have less active motor units, innervating muscle fibers. So because of that, over time, people lose the ability to use carbs as fuel. And if you're an athlete, I think that's not a good thing. We can use fat at a higher percentage of our VO2 max. We know that from the FASTER study, and we know a lot of people are sparing glycogen and doing that. But how many people are keeping track of how often they're going to those intensities? And after a certain point, no matter what, fat is the ability for you to create sugar out of fat is going to start slowing down and not being able to keep up with your energy needs if you continue to do that. And that's a stressor. Mm-hmm. So you got calorie restriction, you got fasting, you've cut the carbs. All of these things are stressors. And, people are trying to add muscle, they're trying to burn fat, and they're not realizing that, especially cortisol, elevated cortisol, you got stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. When you get to stage 3, you're bottomed out, you're cracked out, your cortisol's crash cortisol.
That's me. Well, not anymore.
Yeah,
thankfully, but
anymore.
That was me. Yeah. It feels really bad.
Yeah. And elevated cortisol, it changes the way you partition fuel. You start to trigger gluconeogenesis. Didn't know that there was another way. Just like we talked about that people don't know that there's another way. The same thing can be said for the keto community. We should be able to talk about things and not get so personally offended by other people's dietary choices. And again, you don't know what you don't know. So
yeah. Well, let them be kids. I'm like, these kids don't know what, just like you don't let your kid go use your rifles and let them figure it out with that, or let them figure it out with the razor blades. It's the same thing, they don't know. They just know dopamine and what feels good. They're very primal, and you don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a new concept, like HPA axis dysfunction, which if you want to chat a little bit about that, a lot of people don't know what that is. Is that something
Yeah.
Okay.
So people have to understand is that keto is a stressor on the body. Like it's a positive one, like working out, like going to the sauna, like fasting, but it is still a stressor on the body. And what happens, especially with women, is we have this tendency to we love to I call it the escalation effect. It's like, okay, we're going to change our diet. We're going to go keto. Awesome. Great. Now we're going to start working out every day, hit workouts. Awesome. Now I'm going to start fasting every day. Great. So I'm going to wake up. I'm going to be fasting. I'm going to drink coffee. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to be keto. It's going to be awesome.
Oh my God.
And it's like, whoa, slow down, Nelly. Now it's too many stressors, and maybe some of these things are positive, but you pile them on top of then your job, your kids, financial stress, whatever, your husband, your boyfriend, whatever's going on, your dog died, I don't know, man, life can be stressful. And so all of a sudden, these things that would normally be great, they're a stressor on the body, and you're creating a chronic cortisol output situation. And what happens is that cortisol is amazing. Cortisol's great. It has an anti-inflammatory effect. It makes us feel awesome. It helps us survive. However, you get to that point where you can exhaust the cortisol. You can essentially, your body's I can't produce anymore. But of course we need it for our fight or flight response. So our body will steal from our sex hormones and our other hormones to supply that cortisol for our body for fight or flight. Because and then that's when people lose their period, women lose their periods. And, there's a lot of you get adrenal fatigue or the HPA axis dysfunction, essentially, where when you get into that point where you're thinking about you're not losing weight, women, I'm doing all the things, I'm in a deficit, I'm working out, I'm fasting, I'm not losing weight. That's probably because your body's too stressed out. Because guess what's going to happen when your body is stressed out? Your primal little brain, is saying it's famine, there's war, there's food scarcity, like I'm not letting go of any of these fat stores because we need these to survive. And think about like we, as women, the biological directive is to reproduce. And so that's also why we store more fat, because our bodies are always like, oh, we got to have, calories for the baby making. And so when we put that at risk, essentially, and when your body doesn't feel safe, that's when it's going to like shut down. And so many women run into that in the keto space. I feel like, I even did it. And like, not so much with layering on these things, but my life is crazy. Like we've had a very crazy year. We just was on a house. My husband's deploying, book launch, everything. And I was doing Orange Theory. And, of course you're like, well, I want to like lose weight faster. So I'm going to keto harder, but then I'm going to do Orange Theory because they say HIIT working out is really good for fat burning. So I'm going to fat burn while I'm fasted. It's like, and you might feel good for a while, like that high, like that's your cortisol. That's your like resistance reaction phase. That's when you're like really feeling super pumped. But girl, that you're going to like drive that train off a cliff.
Yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree. I think stress, and this is kind of what I talk about in my Keto Forum program, and we went through the first round last year, and a huge piece of it was, we started with the diet, right? And that's where I like to start, like the nutrition side of things, make sure, that's all in check. But the underlying goal is to teach you that stress management and sleep and all of these other things, like they are so powerful. If you are not sleeping, if you are not managing your stress, it doesn't matter how well you eat. Yes, you can be in a deficit and lose some weight, but yeah, maybe you'll lose the weight, right? But are you going to maintain that long term? Really kind of diving in, we talked about the root cause of inflammation, and all these diseases are kind of stemming out of that. And what we're doing nowadays is really just putting Band-Aids on these things with drugs and sunscreen and whatever it may be. But really, do you feel that, like, what's your take on this concept of metabolic flexibility, and really just the fact that most Americans are metabolically inflexible, and that is what truly probably is one of the root causes of all of these things that are happening?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the latest research is 87 or 88% of adults in the U.S. have at least one marker of metabolic syndrome. It's actually it's now normal in the United States to have metabolic syndrome. It's more normal to have it than to not have it.
It's crazy.
Let that sink in a second, right? That's ridiculous. And that is a direct result of the diet we've been told to eat for the last 50, 60 years. So metabolic flexibility, it seems very confusing to some people, but what you got to do is go back to the very beginning and the root, and also look at your paradigm. My current paradigm, the more I research this stuff and look at this stuff, and I don't even know how many pages of studies I read a week. It's obscene, and Nisha yells at me, but I can't help it because I really want to know the real answer. It looks to me like that human beings are low-carb, salty animals. We are mammals that lived on fatty meat, and we got salt from the blood, from the organs, and then from minerals we found, here and there. But we are by default a low carb mammal. Now we're like a raccoon or a possum. If all we got to eat is jelly donuts, we can eat those, and we're not going to die from poisoning. Oh, you know what I'm saying? We can live for years on jelly donuts and Pepsi. But that does not mean that's healthy. That does not mean that's good. That does not mean that's part of the proper human diet. But I really believe that human beings are a low-carb mammal who has spent the majority of our time on this planet burning fat and ketones for fuel. I think that is our default fuel system. And a lot of people still don't get that. They're still operating under the paradigm, no, we're sugar burners. We can burn fat and ketones if we're in starvation mode. But I would say, no. Let's not go back in time 100 years or 500 years. Let's go back in time 50,000 years. If we were able to magically travel back then and check urine ketones on 100 people running around naked in the sun, every single one of them would be in ketosis. Bet you any amount. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We are by definition low-carb mammals. We are by definition supposed to burn fat as fuel. We can use a secondary fuel source, which is sugar. If our cells need glucose, our liver is happy to make some through a process called gluconeogenesis. We can do do that in seconds if we need glucose. We don't have to ever eat any glucose to fuel those cells. We can make that, right? And so once you say, oh, so human beings, we're supposed to eat low carb by definition, that's not just a fad. That's not just the latest thing. That's actually in our genes. Yes, exactly.
But menopause can be really brutal. It can be, but know that dietary interventions can be helpful. It will not stop or reverse menopause. There is no way for me to put you on any kind of diet that will suddenly turn your ovaries back on. But if we can help you become more insulin sensitive, you will have enhanced cognition, which all of them are like, my brain just isn't firing. I can't remember where I put my keys. It's not like overt dementia, but it will enhance their cognition. It will reduce the amount of visceral fat that they put inside their belly. It will protect their lean body mass, which is super important for fighting against metabolic disease. Adding whole food carbs in, especially I'm more of a fan of targeted carbs. So kind of earning your carbs and doing things like squash and sweet potatoes and purple potatoes and things like that around areas of exercise is an okay thing for some people. Some people are very insulin resistant, and that would be a bad idea. So until you've really fixed your insulin resistance, then it's not a good idea. Or if you're in that early phase of trying to figure out how to keto adapt or fat adapt.
You know, when you hear, you know, the ketogenic diet being tossed around as just a fad, it's like, well, first of all, it's a metabolic state. It's not a diet. It is a diet, but it's the underlying ketosis is a metabolic state. And so I think that the only way to really become metabolically flexible is that you have to teach your body first how to understand how to use ketones and fat for fuel. Because if you don't do that from the beginning, if you don't become fat adapted, like you talked about, then there's no way you can do that. There's no way you can become metabolically flexible. And I feel like a lot of the kind of ailments that we face and a lot of the issues that are happening is because so many people are so metabolically inflexible and they're such sugar burners and they just don't know how to get into that fat burning mode. And that's kind of like my mission is like, all right, let's teach you how to become as metabolically flexible as possible so that you can use those dual fuels, so that you can, you know, maybe enjoy, if even a piece of cake once in a while, that more realistic side of things of life, right? Just like enjoying life in that sense, but to the point where you know what your goals are, you know what your individuality is, you know, all of those things.
Yeah. Like when I love giving people visuals, because I think sometimes like I'm a scientist, right? I'm a doctor, like I'm can sit over here and talk about MCT and GLUT transporters, but yes, glucose is a fuel source that we use a lot. So I think of it like the deadbolt on your front door, right? Every time you need glucose, you put the key in, you turn the lock. When you are just blasting and blasting and blasting that door for years on years on years, you start to strip that the key lock, right? And eventually like the key won't even go in, the key won't turn. And that's what happens when you say people get metabolically inflexible. Is now the body's like, okay, what do we do? Like the lock won't open. And so it starts pumping out more things and more things and more things to try to fix the situation. And if you don't have that metabolic flexibility, you ain't ever getting in the house. So, you know, to have this idea to be able to go through the garage or to go through the back door to use ketones. Yeah. I mean, that's what a broken brain, you know, that's why it works so good for neurologic diseases and things like that. So yeah, is the goal to just like be in ketosis all the time and like only use the garage? Like, no, it's not. It's to be able to go in all doors of the house.
I love that. What do you think about like that whole dual fuel concept?
Love it. And I couldn't agree more. I think the concept of dual fuel is something that we've seen. We see this all the time in research. And I think really it's instead of looking at carbohydrates as an essential nutrient, looking at them as more of a tool to fuel more anaerobic performance. And I love that you hit on the topic, because Jacob and I talk about this all the time, is that most people think it's black or white. Like, oh, why would someone who's a basketball player ever do a ketogenic diet? Or why would someone who's a hockey player do it? And I'm like, well, because if you think about it, like, it's not just, they're like, oh, well, they're only using this system. And you're like, yeah, but not really. Same thing with CrossFit athletes. Like, it's kind of repeated sprints, which in essence turns into like a longer duration bout, which means they're going to tap into more glycolytic versus like, so I think people it's not a black or white scenario first and foremost. And to your point, I think CrossFit athletes, the thing that I've always talked about with them is you think about it, like even some of these elite CrossFit athletes, regardless of their diet, they're likely inducing ketosis through exercise by how many calories they're burning in general. Like they are depleting everything. Like you look at some of these top guys, and I've met some of them. They've come to the lab, and like some of these guys are like, yeah, I eat more of a lower carbohydrate, higher fat approach just because I feel better that way. And they feel better, what you would deem as fueled on fat, because like they're not having, like when they're doing a 30-minute bout, they're not having to run over and slug down Gatorade or slug down some type of carbohydrate substance because they're hitting that wall. It's similar to what we see in the endurance realm or like the long duration activities. Is like being able to run on a fuel source that you can tap into, and being able to tap into your body's own stored body fat or dietary fat from consumption can be a very useful thing in a lot of these sports.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree. And I think that, it all comes back to how metabolically flexible are you? And that's like why I'm so passionate about this subject, because I've realized over the years, it's just like, if we can work towards becoming more metabolically flexible and like train our body to become as metabolically flexible as possible, then we really can have the best of both worlds, And that's something that it took me a while to figure out. Just, I went through periods of very, low carb keto, and I wasn't getting the results I wanted, or I initially got the results I wanted. And then, I hit this stall, and I was like, I went from being fat phobic to super carb phobic. And that's really what, a lot of women who come to me that's where they're at. They went keto, they found, great results initially. And then all of a sudden they hit this like quote unquote plateau, and they're so carb phobic, and they're just like, I don't know what to do now. And it's just like, I feel like there's this disconnect within this community. Just there's some people who are like strict, you have to be keto 24/7. There's others who aren't. And I think there needs to be like some more education.
Middle ground.
Yeah, a middle ground. And that's what I'm trying to like help move that forward in terms of, teaching people that maybe your end goal should be being more metabolically flexible and working towards that. All right, I hope you enjoyed the trailer, and make sure you subscribe so you're notified when the episodes go live next week. See you then.